Hi everyone, I'm Abigail and this is Anna, and today we're going to be presenting on the Supreme Court case Trinity Lutheran Church of Columbia versus Comer, which was decided in 2017. So this case deals with the religious freedom under the First Amendment, specifically whether a religious organization can be denied access to a public benefit just because it is a church. So we're going to walk through all of the parties that are involved, the facts of the case, the legal issue, the court's decisions, and then also explain why the court ruled that way. And then at the end, we're going to be giving our opinion on the case. So, first, the plaintiff in this case is Trinity Lutheran Church of Columbia, Missouri. The church operates a preschool and a daycare center that also includes a playground, which is used by children in the community. The defendant is Carol Comer, who was the director of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Her department oversees a program that provides grants to organizations for improving playground surfaces using recycled materials. Trinity Lutheran applied for one of these grants to improve their playground, but their application was denied. So the key issue here is that the denial was not based on the quality of their application, but it was based solely on the fact that the organization was a church. So now to better understand the case, we need to look at what actually happened. Trinity Lutheran Church runs a daycare and a preschool, and like many childcare centers, they have a playground for children to use. The playground had a gravel surface, which we all know can be unsafe for children if they fall. So the church applied for a state grant through Missouri's Scrap Tire program. So this program provides funding to nonprofits to replace their playground surfaces with safer rubber material that is made from recycled tires. So what's really important here is that Trinity Lutheran wasn't just any applicant. They were actually ranked fifth out of 44 applicants. So that means that they were clearly qualified and they would have received the grant under any normal circumstances. However, despite this high ranking, they were denied the grant. The reason for this denial was Missouri's state constitution, which prohibited public funds from being given to religious organizations. So even though the funding was for something non-religious, like playground safety, they were automatically disqualified simply because they were a church. Because of this, Trinity Lutheran sued the state, arguing that this decision violated their rights under the First Amendment.
So, the main legal issue in this case is whether the government can deny a public benefit to an organization solely because it is religious. This issue falls under the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment, which protects individuals and organizations from being penalized because of their religious beliefs or their identity. The court had to determine whether Missouri's policy was a form of discrimination based on religious status. Some key concepts related to this issue include discrimination based on status, which means treating an organization differently just because it is religious. Another concept is indirect coercion, meaning the government is not directly banning religion, but it is putting an extra amount of pressure on those organizations by denying benefits. And the idea of play in the joints, that one refers to the space between what the government must do and what it is allowed to do regarding religion. And then finally, just an extra one is strict scrutiny, which we will explain later how it plays into the case, but it is the highest level of judicial review where the government must prove it has a very strong reason for its actions. So, overall, the question is whether Missouri's policy crossed the line from neutrality into unconstitutional discrimination regarding religion. So, we're going to talk about the court's decision as well. The case went through multiple levels of the court system. First, the federal district court dismissed the lawsuit, saying that the government is not required to provide financial benefits to religious organizations. So they basically believed it was not discrimination. Then the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit affirmed that decision, agreeing that Missouri could rely on its state constitution, which basically they were saying that allows them to act in the way they did. So, again, would not be classified as discrimination. However, the Supreme Court of the United States reversed those two lower court decisions. So the Supreme Court ruled that denying a generally available public benefit to an organization solely because of its religious status violates the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. So they classified it as discrimination. So, why the Supreme Court decided this? The reasoning behind their decision is really the most important part of this case. First, the court recognized that the state excluded Trinity Lutheran only because it was a religious organization, and this decision created unequal access to a public program that was otherwise available to similar nonprofit organizations. The policy also pressured the church to give up its religious identity in order to receive the benefit, which the court viewed as a violation of religious freedom. The court emphasized that this type of action is not neutral. It is a penalty on the free exercise of religion. And because of this, the policy had to meet strict scrutiny, which is a concept we mentioned earlier, meaning that the state needed a very strong and compelling reason to justify it. Missouri argued that it was just trying to maintain that separation between church and state, but the court found that this reasoning was not strong enough. And this is specifically true because the funding was being used for a non-religious purpose, which was just improving playground safety for the children. So it wasn't being used for a religious event or any improvements inside the church that would involve religious activity. So overall, the court concluded that the policy violated the free exercise clause because it discriminated based on religious status without sufficient justification.
Okay, so lastly, we're just going to talk about our opinion and our thoughts on the case and how the courts ruled. So, first, we disagreed with the opinions of both of the lower courts that dismissed the lawsuit and allowed Missouri to rely on its own state constitution. So, on the other hand, we agreed with the Supreme Court's final decision in this case. Trinity Lutheran wasn't really asking for any sort of special treatment. They really just wanted equal access to a public program that was available to any of the other nonprofits. They clearly deserved this equal access, seeing as they ranked fifth among 44 in the application process. So denying them the grant just because they are a church definitely feels like discrimination to us, which goes against the principles of the First Amendment. So it's also important that we recognize that the funding was not being used for any religious purposes, as we've said before. It was really just being used to improve playground safety, which actually benefits the community as a whole, since the church doesn't really control access to their playground, and anybody from the community is welcome to use it. So while we understand the concern about maintaining separation between the church and state, this situation doesn't really seem to threaten that separation in a meaningful way. Instead, it's really just pressuring religious organizations to give up their identity in order to receive the equal treatment that they're looking for. So excluding the religious organizations in this context seems unnecessary and unfair. The Supreme Court decision also sets an important precedent that religious organizations cannot be excluded from public programs simply because of their identity. So overall, we believe the court made the right decision by protecting equal access and upholding religious freedom. Thank
Thank you for
you.
listening.